I have some good news and I have some bad news for you. I'm going to give you the good news first because that's the way you're supposed to do it, right? The good news is that by the end of this video, you will have a complete knowledge of all the scores, the happenings, general vibes, and the teams that have made the knockouts in the Europa League so that you can start to understand what you need to be paying attention to. The bad news is that apparently the Europa League didn't get the memo. They didn't get the memo at all. The Champions League delivered a spectacular teams flying all over the place final day. Well, the Europa League really narrowed the contest down to like very few teams right around the line. But the good news part of the bad news is that there were 2-3 matches that were my kind of matches of the round that had incredible drama. And if you missed them, I am absolutely going to get you caught up on all of that action. We'll start, though, obviously, we're going to look at every score, at least very quickly, with Aston Villa beating Salzburg. Very impressive effort from Salzburg, took a 2-0 lead before Villa battled back to actually end up winning the match. This was very important for Salzburg. If they'd been able to win, they had at least a chance to get to the knockouts, but they end up locked down here at 6 points. It was kind of a fever dream for Salzburg to try to get there in the first place, right? Their goal difference was not one of the better tallies out of all of these teams. And when you look at these standings, they basically kind of had a hope and a dream coming into this. They needed some other results that kind of didn't end up going their way in the first place anyways, so it was going to be tough. But, you know, jumping out to that 2-0 lead, it actually looked like Salzburg and Austria as a whole, who've had a very bad European campaign, were going to get some sort of good result. I mean, remember when this Salzburg team was in the Champions League round of 16? Now they're not even making the Europa League first playoff round. Very disappointing for them. Villa had already locked up a top 8 spot. They end up finishing second in the table. Basel and Viktoria Plzen. Viktoria Plzen has managed to complete an entirely unbeaten league phase. 3 wins, 5 draws. They win at Basel in Switzerland. If you have a keen memory and a sharp eye, you'll notice that, you know, Basel was another one of those teams that needed a win on the final day to be able to get over Celtic, Young Boys Braun, Lille, one of those teams to try and get into the next round. Well, they obviously didn't get it done. Viktoria Plzen, an impossible team to score against, an impossible team to handle, and now they have played their way as an unbeaten team, one of only, well, the only one, literally, which is fantastic. I was just confirming that. The only unbeaten team in the entire Europa League stage. They do not get top 8 because they did not win enough matches. If they'd turned one of those draws into a win, they might have been able to sneak it, but no, 3 wins, not enough. 5 draws, very impressive. You do not want to play Viktoria Plzen in the next round. Congrats to them. Real Betis against Feyenoord. Hugely disappointing for Feyenoord. Somebody honking outside. I guess they must have been a Feyenoord fan. The Dutch teams haven't done nearly as well as they did last year. They were one-hit wonders last year. Real Betis at home, they took care of business. They had the lead 2-0 in the first half. Feyenoord pulled this back late, 77th minute. I know, I'm working on it. 77th minute, but it was not enough. Feyenoord, they were on that line, right, of 6 points. All these teams that were down here on 6 points are like, well, you need to go win. And in the Champions League, all of those teams were winning, and that's what created so much drama on the final day. Well, here you've already seen Salzburg, Basel, and Feyenoord all lose the match that they needed to win. Flip side, Real Betis with the win. It was impossible for them to not make the top 8 as long as they won their match. So they put that in the bag, and they are a top 8 team by in the first round. Celtic was the danger team. They were right on the line right here. And they put that to bed incredibly early. They scored 3 goals in the first 19 minutes. So the drama around Celtic, or any team that might have been hoping Celtic was going to be the team to slip up, it didn't live up to it. Utrecht had a miserable campaign. They got absolutely washed away here. Celtic avoids complete collapse and embarrassment and disappointment with 4 points in its final 2 matches to lock down a playoff spot. Utrecht finishes with literally just 1 point. Red Star and Celta Vigo. The disappointment for Spanish league teams continues as Red Star kind of outplays Celta Vigo to a 1-1 draw. 2 disallowed goals in the first half and an equalizer a minute after Celta Vigo had scored to finally take the lead. Only 5 shots for Celta Vigo in this entire match. There was nothing really on the line in this match. It's just not a great look, obviously, for the Spanish teams that are not Real or Atletico Madrid and Barcelona. Every single one of the Spanish teams that's not one of those 3 has struggled in their European campaigns. Celta Vigo barely finishes in the seeded side with this draw of the playoff. I'm not talking about top 8. I'm talking about seeded side of the draw at all. Porto, they were the team, if we look at this table, I don't think I've shown you this part yet, that was right on the outside looking in to try to jump into the top 8. If they won, they just needed somebody in front of them to stumble. There were a lot of options for teams that could have been that team 2 stumble, and they got 1 of those. They went behind early. It looked like it might be a nightmare for a moment, but 3 goals before halftime put Porto out ahead of Rangers, who, Celtic carried the banner for Scotland here. Rangers was out before this round, even though they'd won their last match. They were on 1 point coming into the last 2 weeks. They managed to beat Ludogorets, which looked like at the time it might doom Ludogorets, but they finished on 4 points ahead of just 4 teams. So pretty nightmarish showing for them, while Porto does fly into the top 8 with that win. They actually jumped Braga, Freiburg, Roma. They went vaulting over everybody. But we'll catch you up on where everybody's ended up here. Fenerbahce and FCSB. FCSB needed a win. They didn't get it. They're one of those teams in the Brotherhood of the Six. Okay, they were chilling down here at 6 points. They needed a result or something to jump up. And while they did not lose, they also did not win. In fact, they were losing until the 71st minute when they scored a goal, maybe gave themselves some hope because, things were shifting around right on that line before. You never know. If you score, you go up. They needed some results to turn. Those results didn't turn their way. Even if they'd won this match, they wouldn't have been able to get into the top 24, if that's any consolation. The draw keeps Fenerbahce on the unseeded side. They're not going to get that second match at home of the playoff, but they are in the playoff, so this match wasn't of huge importance. Go Ahead Eagles, another one of those teams in the Brotherhood of Six that failed to win. They had a tough task here. Braga's a top 8 team. They've had an excellent campaign. Go Ahead Eagles, in their first ever European campaign, it's struggling. They were struggling massively. I'm not gonna lie to you. But the 0-0 here is pretty damn good for them. This is a good look. The match was shut down. There was not a lot going either direction. Go Ahead Eagles felt fine. The draw is good enough for Braga, keeps them in the top 8, so I think they were okay with that. Go Ahead Eagles needed to chase this more. They obviously weren't able to create a lot of pressure, but their goal difference was terrible. They needed a lot to go their way while beating Braga. They really let this slip in the previous round with a bad 3-1 loss to Nice, who's been terrible in Europe. Even though they're from the French league, they have been objectively terrible in Europe. So Go Ahead Eagles, their slim chance dies. Genk had the opportunity to get into the top 8. If we look at these pre-match day 8 standings, Genk is sitting down here in 10th. With a win, they go up to 16 points, which obviously gives them a chance to clear a whole number of teams. And they really did have the opportunity to clear those teams, but some heartbreaking changes happened later on in the match day that kept them from that. But great performance by the Belgian team, especially considering they went behind early. Malmo tried to park the bus here in this match. You could see in the stats, it's really an absolute run-up from Genk here. They deserved the win, and they got it. 25 shots to 8, just in case you hadn't noticed that up to this point. Belgian teams are looking good. Right, Club Brugge with a great performance in the Champions League. Genk has shown up and nearly gotten a top 8 finish in the Europa League, which, look, I love the Europa League. I think the Europa League in a lot of ways is more fun than the Champions League because we get, none of the super top teams, right, that are just going to kind of bully everybody at the end of the day. We get the best teams from a lot of different countries, the champions of a lot of different countries competing at this level, whether it be somebody like Genk or Go Ahead Eagles. It's not even a champion of their country, but has shown that a big improvement. They've shown a lot of quality, and they get the chance to go and show that some more. Play a team like Braga, play a team like Lille or Nottingham Forest or Lyon, right? And be able to show their stuff. Speaking of Lille, they beat Freiburg 1-0. Freiburg's anti-football didn't work here. Lille's been a little up and down. Finally broke through after a red card in the 74th minute with an Olivier Giroud penalty in the 92nd. Lille was floating around in the ether here. If they lost, things could have gotten interesting. They could have potentially fallen out, but they stay firmly in the playoff. Hell would have had to broken loose, and even if they lost the way it turned out, they would have been fine. Freiburg needed a lot of things to go against them to get knocked out of the top 8, even with a loss. They allowed 4 goals in 8 matches. They did what they came here to do. I don't expect them to be a real threat to actually win the whole thing, but they're there. They're on the dance floor. They're a host team for the round of 16. Good for them. That brings us to the one team that I really had circled coming into this. There was only one team that was just a point off of the top. Now, obviously, Celtic was winning in a blowout early, so Ludogorets knows, right? Ludogorets knows they have to win their match against Nice. Now, I told you Nice has been trash, and they were, once again, trash in Europe. Ludogorets, the champions of Bulgaria, pick up a 1-0 win. They will be heading to the knockouts. They were the better team on the XG, and they certainly did not get outplayed by a French league team here in Nice that finishes on a shocking 3 points. I mean, really terrible performance in the Europa League for them. Ludogorets becomes the only team to jump into the top 24 on the final day with this win. But who, pray tell, did they knock out? Well, we're going to get there, obviously. Lyon with a fun shootout against PAOK Thessaloniki. This was 1-1 in the first half. Giannis Konstantelius, the PAOK Thessaloniki wonder kid, gets 2 cards in 5 minutes, and boom, he's out. Lyon takes the lead. Then it's tied again. Right, these Greek teams are tough. Lyon's already through, so this was not, there wasn't really anything on the line for either of these teams, so naturally they played an incredible barn burner. A missed penalty, same guy scores 5 minutes later, and then in the 93rd minute they add another goal. Now, of course, with the red card in the first half, Lyon was obviously the better team here and ended up grabbing a deserved win, but some impressive heart from PAOK Thessaloniki. Lyon finishes top of the table. There should probably be more of a reward for that than there is, but congratulations to them. They are top of the league stage, while PAOK Thessaloniki, with those 2 late goals, falls out of the seeded side and right into the unseeded side. They're going to play Red Star or Celta Vigo. They're paired up with Lille in that little pocket of teams. Bologna delivers a beatdown to Maccabi Tel Aviv. Chance for Bologna to get top 8 with a win. They didn't end up getting it. Maccabi Tel Aviv ends up with a really terrible performance. Not only do they end up on 1 point, they allowed 22 goals and scored just 2. It's a minus 20 goal difference in 8 matches played. So just miserable time in the Europa League for them. Bologna ends up 1 point off the top 8, which is a bitter pill to swallow, but they are in the top seeded group with Genk and Bologna, which should give them a pretty favorable match in the next round to try to get through. Now, Midtjylland, they are another top 8 team, rounding out with a 2-0 win against Dinamo Zagreb. Now, this was dangerous for Dinamo Zagreb, because if you look at this, they're on 10 points. Ludogorets is winning. Like, Dinamo Zagreb's the team that could be getting jumped here. Right? This is not the situation they wanted to be in. They knew going into this, if they lost, they could be eliminated. And they're, Dinamo Zagreb's a great club out of Croatia. They should not be getting eliminated. It's tough to go on the road against Midtjylland. They've battled it into the second half before the goals started to come. Midtjylland needed the win to make sure that they were a top 8 team. In fact, they finished 3rd in the entire table, just 2 points off the top. So incredibly impressive from Midtjylland. Fortunately for Dinamo Zagreb, all of the things that needed to happen to knock them out did not come to pass. They managed to survive with just 3 wins and a draw out of 8 matches on this loss. They survived because they won their previous match against FCSB 4-1 a little earlier in January. But that was a little nerve-wracking for Dinamo Zagreb. They were on the line there. Nottingham Forest, a demolition against Ferencvaros. The Hungarian champions become the only team to drop out of the top 8. They'd had an obviously wonderful performance in the table up to this point, but they got washed away on the road against a Premier League team. Disappointing finish. Not a disappointing finish, but a disappointing run for Nottingham Forest. They would have expected top 8. They finished 13th with this win. There was a chance to be unseeded if they didn't win here. And Ferencvaros, weirdly enough, has fallen down right next to them on the table, still ahead of them. Not on goal difference, 8-1 in that regard, but 15 points to 14 points. So great performance from Fenerbahce. Going on the road against Nottingham Forest, it was tough. Fenerbahce drops out. Porto jumps in. That was the only change in the top 8. But then we get to my 3 matches that provided basically all of the drama. Because the only reason that was the only change in the top 8 was Fenerbahce dropping out and Porto dropping in, or jumping in, was Roma Panathinaikos. This was a weird match. It's one of those settings where the stadium's half full because you can't, the stadium's not up to code for the European competitions, or it's under construction, or maybe a little bit of both, right? But half the stadium's tarped off. It's always the half the camera's looking at, so you can hear a crowd, but you can't see them, right? They're just sounds like it's pumped in. They're dancing on the near side of the camera. And then in the 14th minute, Roma, who you're going to expect to be able to win this match pretty comfortably eventually, gets a red card. Clear red card. It pulls him down from behind, like hand on the shoulder with pressure, with the guys completely in on goal. So Mancini gets a red card. And it takes Panathinaikos plodding along into the 58th minute when Roma makes a horrifying defensive mistake. I mean, up there with the guy heads it back towards the goalkeeper and doesn't realize there is a player, Taborda in this case, between him and the goalkeeper. Heads it back to Taborda. Taborda gets it, takes his time, and navigates his way into the back of the net. Just so happens Taborda's Italian, so we got an Italian scoring for the Greek team against the Italians. Tsimikas also plays for Roma, so you had a Greek playing in Greece against a Greek team. There was all sorts of that going on in this match, and then Roma created a few chances, but there wasn't a whole lot going on. It was a pretty depressing match until Żelkowski scores in the 80th minute. Defensive header that ends up being just kind of flick on to this big Polish dude at the back post, and he just nods it home. He's like a beanpole. He's not big, broad, but he is tall, and he throws every inch of his height into that ball, heads it home. And that really shifted the table at the top here for Roma. Because if that goal doesn't happen, Genk is in the top 8. The only reason they don't go there is because in the 80th minute, while down a man for like the entire match, Roma finds an equalizer on the road in Greece, in Athens. It was a gut check for Roma. They ended up packing it in late just to be able to hang on to the result and get top 8. Obviously, a club the size of Roma is going to be European regular. They're going to be expecting a top 8 finish in the Europa League to get that bye. Genk would have been the surprise, but Roma was this close to blowing it. Then Genk would have been watching that. They scored their goal to go ahead against Malmo about the same time in the match. So they would have been watching that going, oh, we scored. We're finally in the top 8. And then they get news that Roma, down a man, has grabbed a goal to steal that spot away from them. So that was some of the drama. The other drama was about Brann and Young Boys. Now, Brann of Norway fumbled it. They're playing a bad Sturm Graz team. The Austrians have not been good at any level in Europe this year, and they lose. Right, and Brann knows if they lose, they could be eliminated. Now, it was left until the 85th minute until this goal was scored, so there was precious little time that Brann was really on the hot seat, but they ended up being the last team there. Sturm Graz was already eliminated, picks up just its second win of the competition, and Brann is now hanging on as the very last team. Or in fact, at that point, they were out. When that goal was conceded against Sturm Graz, I believe they were out. It all happens very close together, because this was the other match that mattered. Stuttgart against Young Boys. Young Boys is in at the start of the day, but they do have a road match against a team in the Bundesliga, so they were they were on thin ice. They were definitely a candidate for being eliminated, right? That's not an easy spot to be in. And Stuttgart opened with 2 goals in the first 7 minutes. So, I mean, you can understand, you're looking at this table and you're going, okay, Young Boys loses, the door is open. Somebody's going to be jumping up. But then Young Boys scores before and after the half. 2-2. Whole flip in the energy of the game, obviously. Stuttgart doesn't really need this. They don't really need this that bad. Stuttgart's already safe, so they're playing with house money, and then yet still, Young Boys is eliminated by a 90th minute goal. So that goal is conceded by Brann. The Norwegians are out. And then in the 90th minute, Stuttgart scores a goal to move the Norwegians back in and move Young Boys out. Now, Young Boys had a really rough start to this. Like, it's just, Young Boys has been bad in Europe for a couple of years now, right? They don't seem to, they're not at the top of the Swiss league right now. That's Thun, who's a team that just got promoted. Young Boys are not in that conversation. The club is not really where it was. This would have been a great moment for them to hold on to, saying, look, we still got it in some sense. And an incredible 2-goal comeback against a Bundesliga team that miraculously eliminates Brann, right? It had Young Boys literally in 24th position with the goal difference at -5 and 10 points. And then Brann, obviously, if they're drawing, they were -1 and 10 points, so they would have been in and Young Boys would be out. So basically, Brann concedes the goal, is then out. Young Boys is all of a sudden in, because at that point they were actually still eliminated. Even though they had come back 2-2, they were still out with the -5 and 10 points. They would have been at -1. They would have been up here, then -3, -4, and -5, right? Which is absolutely brutal, but that's the, them's the rules. And then they basically were in for 5 minutes. I don't know if they knew that at the time or not. Who knows? Because it's hard to communicate that stuff onto the field as quickly as it's happening. But they were in for a few minutes, and then they conceded that late goal to lose to Stuttgart. Now, Stuttgart themselves ends up in 11th. There was a chance that if some teams lost, they could jump into the top 8. It didn't happen, so they end up in a seeded part of the draw, right? They're paired with Ferencvaros because you always get the 2 teams paired together. But there are some heavy hitters. Bologna, Stuttgart, Nottingham Forest, undefeated Viktoria Plzen, and Celta Vigo, all on the side of the play, on the seeded side of the playoff draw. I wouldn't want to play Genk either. All right, they won 5 of their 8 matches. They dropped 16 points in the league stage. Pretty damn good team over there. But then on the unseeded side, you get Lille as well. You could have a Spain versus France matchup in the playoff round, which would be pretty wild, right? It's the only Power League team that ends up on the unseeded side of the draw. And if you're looking Power League teams that didn't make it at all, that's Nice, all by their lonesome, right? A top 5 league team that failed to make the Europa League stage, and they did so in convincing fashion. But a brutal late bottle for Young Boys. Brann gets into the last spot as, one team jumps in, Ludogorets, and one team jumps out, Young Boys. And then up here we had one team jump in Porto, and one team jump out in Ferencvaros. Other than that, everything stayed consistent, and the playoff draws are going to be set